Now we can see it.
There we go. All right. Hello, I'm Doug Stahl, and the growth team is here. We are going to attempt to do a walkthrough of the GitLab.com registration process. I have a certain agenda, and I'll be trying to follow it. Feel free to interrupt me, ask questions. We can go any direction with this. I just have an idea of where I want to go mapped out. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. All right. So, here's some of the agenda I plan on. Well, some of the things I plan on, the order I thought of following here. And so that's what we're going to start out with. So, GitLab.com, how do you register? What are the entry points? So first of all, there's our traditional uh, sign up entry point, which will be hit either when someone comes to the site, they'll probably come to gitlab.com, they'll hit this site, and then they'll have to hit register now. Um, and then they'll hit this end. And this is the entry point for free, what we consider free, um, invites, uh, and subscriptions, I believe. Um, the other entry point can be reached by if you were to try to go to gitlab.com, which will redirect us to the About site, what we call it. And I believe if I click on Get Free Trial, I'm going to be redirected there. You see down below in my left-hand corner, when I hover over it, the URL that it's going to hit. So it'll hit that one. This is our other entry point. And this is the entry point for predetermined trial registrations signups. Uh, from my knowledge, the About site is the only place that actually directs this. There may be other campaigns outside of the About site. I don't know. We could look at the logs and probably figure that out or ask the marketing team if they advertise this link in other places. Um, but as you can see, we are now at two different types of entry points. One here. And I should probably show you, this isn't what it really looks like on GitLab.com. We're missing the social sign-ons since I think we are on my GDK there. So what I will do is do a GitLab.com. And, let's go here. I'm going to try to go a different way around this to show that. Okay, now this is the GitLab.com one. And as you can see, there are a few differences. This is the free that we were talking about, and this is the trial. The trial has a bit more marketing with it.
You said
Um,
for the free one that it is also used for subscriptions, or did I misunderstand that?
yeah, let's see that. If you were to go to pricing, and you see I'm on GitLab.com there, I could flip these. But if I go to buy premium, and get started. And you can see, yes, it does direct me here for subscriptions. So that is the same. There is something happening behind the scenes, and we'll get into that, how we like tag that or determine that even though it hits here as a subscription registration, and that changes the flow as the user progresses.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's dig into what we're actually hitting there. So, and yeah. So the free registration, when the user hits that initial page, we come here, right? When they submit the page for the user to be created, we come here. However, and you can see we're inheriting from devise. If we have time, we can go into what complexity that adds, but that's it's a lot of complexity. Um, so we can see here we are at the registrations controller in what we call CE, which will be App Controllers Registrations Controller. What is really being hit when we hit GitLab.com, since it's an EE instance, is we are hitting the registrations controller in EE. So, which is a prepended module, which means it will override, it will use and override anything that is done in the CE controller. So, where that comes into play is we can see some of the small differences here. And this echoes all the way down to the view layer as well. We're only seeing the controller layer here, so there can be different view differences as well for these things. So you can see like the new doesn't really do too much. I mean, there's other things here, right? Which we can dig into later. Um, but you can see for the new, it doesn't look like there's much difference. We're just adding some tracking for an EE instance, right? Um, but when we get into things that Create is doing, we're doing a lot more. And that's where it becomes more complex. So what I wanted to talk about here is just that complexity here a little bit. And so we can see right away in the free signup, we already have two layers, right? We already have the CE version, and now if we are on EE, we have another complexity of adding on. Well, now you've got to consider this the EE override of it, right? And if we look at things like after successful create hook, this is where a lot of the complexity is going to come in. If we look at where code following isn't working. We look at where this is defined. This is still in CE. So we are just doing some things that is going to apply to every single instance of GitLab here, you know, those things. But now when we go into EE, we can see now we're even doing more stuff. So let alone, you know, there's some indirection here because we're jumping outside the create. Now you got to go look and see what that's doing. And now you also have to come over here in EE and see, well, I don't know, that's not all of it. You know, on GitLab.com, we got to look at this too. And we see some of the things that are going on here. And just to lightly touch on, and we'll dig into this in a minute, the difference here, you see like, oh, well, CE, now where's the GitLab.com stuff come in too here? And we can see we also bail on this if you're not if we are not in onboarding. And where is that? See, it's very hard to keep track of all these things, even if you know the code or wrote the code. But there is also a conditional in this layer of only do these things if you're on GitLab.com. So there's yet another layer. So now we got three layers, let alone the layer of devise, which I don't want to get distracted too much by, but that's yet another layer inside of here. So all of this on user creation, right? So we're now at three or more layers of code complexity here, just around figuring out how things are flowing, right? And now let's add on another layer. So here we have that trials registration. Oops, right here, right? This is this one. And what is trials registration? Well, trials registration now inherits from the registrations controller, which is already 3 layers deep or so. Now we got a layer of trial registration on top of it, right? And so now there's yet another override of the thing we're overriding already, right? So now we're, you know, deep in the weeds. Let alone now we're overriding how the user is actually built before we actually hit the save button on it. So now there's more complexity here just for trials in the build service, which wasn't overridden in any of the other ones. It was just set to one thing, right? And we're also adding more tracking, right? Why not?
What was the judgment, like at least in the current production version of the trial registration, we have these I don't want to call it advertisement, but you see like company logos and stuff on the right-hand side. Why do we not show that for free accounts? Because there we also want to convince them to buy. or don't we?
A good question.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't have no answers there.
Yeah, and that's why I think the unified concept is good because I think historically in this space, for whatever reason, like resourcing or whatever has been happening on growth in the last many years, we would make a change in one type of registration and then just stop and then not touch anything else. And it's kind of become a mess because of that, I think.
Or maybe because if I click on trial, maybe I mean business, or I'm like more interested in like, converting. That
Yeah,
makes sense to see those companies there.
yeah, there was definitely a explicit reasoning for doing these things.
Yeah, and it was business strategy around trials. However, that was not really based on super solid evidence. We do get really good conversion from free signups as well. So that was kind of just business strategy from the leadership at that time that we should go after trials because we want to push ultimate.
Cool. Makes sense. Um, okay. So now we're on the trials registration controller, and this one thankfully isn't that large. That doesn't mean it isn't complex. Um, and sometimes that's a danger in and of itself. You look at something, it's like, oh, it's only a few lines. It means it isn't complex, and that can send a wrong signal. Um, so we have yet in that after successful creation hook, we have yet another hook, right? And so now I don't know how many layers going on here. Um, so now we're doing other things. And these things are, thankfully only about experiments, and so there's not much complexity there. But you have to know where to put things. And, that's what becomes hard, right? Like, how do you do an experiment just targeted at trials, right? Yeah, trial registrations. And that's why this is here, right? But you have to know where to put it. And through all those different layers, it's easy to make a mistake. That is hard to notice until it's already in production. Um, okay, so and then we see something like here. Here's our little friend that allows us to layer on uh, changes to something. So now we have this like, what's this doing here? Like we're already in EE. Usually we don't see it. This is for was placed here by Jihu. And so yet we have another layer of overrides in GitLab overall, which we really don't concern ourselves with. We let Jihu make these changes. We don't actually add them unless they add them, right? But this is like telling us that Jihu has a different way to do this. So as complex it is on our side. You can only imagine how complex it is for Jihu, who's just trying to keep up with what we're doing and not break stuff and then, change reverse engineer our ideas.
Sorry, Doc, I
Yeah,
think it was mentioning that Jihu is Chinese version of GitLab, if someone does
there
not
you
know
go.
that.
Yep. Thank you. Yes.
I'm counting it. I think we're 5 layers deep. We're 5 nesting dolls in with Jihu.
That's good. We haven't even gotten to like any of the other nesting things. It's just controller level, right? If you were to look at the services, those are 2 to 3 layers in and of themselves, these built services. So, okay, this is just with so that shows a little bit of the CE, EE, GitLab.com complexity. I had opened, let's see if I find it here. If you want to read more about how to do these things, you can look at the EE features guideline, and I will add that to either the video notes or the doc notes for easy finding. But this explains how that layering works, how to code around that layering, and things like that. Doesn't make it, after reading that doc, it isn't going to make it feel simple. but it is a good reference. Okay, so let's talk about one more layer before we even get past user creation. So another layer. And this one kind of, like intermingles with devise too, because it is a devise concept to rely on. But we got these things down here, right? These social sign-ons, right? Right here. And then of course in the regular sign up a little bit more. We're a little more focused here. So how does that work? Right? Okay. So here's an omni-auth callbacks controller. So this controller is what these social sign-on buttons will end up hitting after you click on them and they route you back to GitLab. So as you know, when you click these things, and you can set up your local GDK to do it. I've done it a few times so that when you click it, it goes to that provider. You put, whatever, use them to sign on. It creates your account and you come back to this controller right here. And so this is even more complex than the other area, yet it needs to intertwine with the user being created as well. So this is more complex because if we were to look at this controller and see how many other controllers inherit from this, let's do, okay, at least two others, the LDAP one, and that, and then the groups, which is a group SAML, I believe, as we can see here, group SAML. Those are two other types of OmniAuth, and they all inherit from it. So why I mention those is you have to be very careful about what you do in here because these other ones inherit from it, and you have to be careful not to affect them. Because other self-managed instances and I think group SAML is what we use to log in through Okta. And so you could break those. And so we have to be aware that anything we do in here could affect those. It could affect the enterprise users concept, the group SAML creation concept, all those things. So it's very tread carefully. And then testing this area is not as straightforward as the other ones in an automated way. So it makes it even harder to be sure of your changes when you change this area. So this is the CE version. It travels through handle OmniAuth. A lot of things will end up hitting the handle OmniAuth. And then we hit the OmniAuth flow is from my recollection of changing things in here in the past. This is what we end up hitting right here. Is the for GitLab.com, you'll hit the OmniAuth flow. The OmniAuth flow hits all this fun stuff. It handles not only registration, though, it handles regular sign up too. So even more complex is that this controller not only deals with users who are signing up using those social sign-ons, but also sign in. So that's why this if current user thing exists right here. That says it's for sign-on. That's not for us in our concerned. But okay, so now we're at see, yeah. See how this is like confusing? Because it says sign in. And so I expect to see something different. But I think we have to remember that we're technically already signed in, and maybe that's the reason for the name of that. And then we find and update that user that was already created. You see all this stuff here. Here is our entry points. Usually we're going to be in here for our entry points for GitLab.com for our growth concerns. So it will be, we're going to go to the EE controller, and when we go to the EE controller, you can see our entry points. But it will be in here, and I think what we're going to be hitting is some callback, some entry point in here. And I don't remember the name, but we'll be able to see it fairly easily when we go to the other one. So let's go to the and as you can see from the name of the other controllers, even the ones that inherit from this controller have overrides as well for EE. So even if you are pretty sure you're not affecting them because you looked in the CE one and you're like, oh, I'm not touching them, you got to also look at the EE one. So be careful. All right, so here we are, perform registration task. And I believe if we look back at this controller, we will see the entry point for that. Perform the tasks, and it is in that sign in user flow right here. Okay. And so here we are. And here we can match it up with, finally, with what we were doing here, right? So we have our create here, our status create here. And this status create service is our entry point for tagging and setting the registration type that we use throughout the rest of registration. Okay, so here's our entry point. One other complexity to add here is that if we look at what is being sent here, you can see we pull off these params a little bit differently, that we need to determine what type of registration it is. And that's what we use these things for. And we also use it for the GLM params, which are some kind of, I always forget the name when I look it up. I think GLM is some sort of Google or marketing or something like that thing. It like allows us to track where the registration came from, what was the purpose, that type of thing, depending on what's set there. Not us, but marketing for a lead type of a thing. So as you can see here, we're just setting the params here, which are just going through your regular Rails permit thing. For this one, we have to fetch it off of OmniAuth right here. And then if we were to look at the registrations controller, we set them differently as well. And right here is what we do. And this, so we have our entry point for trial registrations, right? And that's how we know we want a trial. So how do we then set that when we to be used through the rest of the registration process? We used to pass a parameter around through the URL params. And so that's very fragile. We always had to make sure we carried it on. Part of some of the refactoring we did a couple years ago was to push it into the database and set it when we know it. And so we're in the trials controller, we know it's a trial. We merge that onto the params. Then when we trigger into this status create service, which since the trial registrations controller inherits from registrations controller, it calls this, and then it will set, we override that and push it on basically. And so when we go then into that service layer, we know it's a trial, we set it at that time. Okay. All right, so then as we can see, now we're at the registration scroll. The user has been created. Now we need to set the registration type by setting it here at this layer. When we first know it, that means we do not have to try to carry that information on through URL params, cookies, things like that, that we used to do. And that made it very fragile and hard to experiment in. So what we have done then in this status create service is we will set that registration type. There you go. I'm not sure. No, that's not what it stands for in our terms. Yes, it may stand for that in the rest of the world. Yeah. So I could find it and I'll link it after this. Yeah. And so now we're at the status create service. And what we've done here is we've introduced a concept where I said we're going to record it in the database. And what we did was we decided a couple years ago, and I pushed for this idea, was from doing all this refactoring and creating tests in this area is like we need a better way to do this. And so I introduced the idea of creating a JSON-B column in the user details table that will store this information, and we can reference it throughout the rest of the registration process. And maybe it could be used later on in the product if desired for a user. In other words, the beginnings of the personalization stack, way back. So I don't think anybody's ever used it, but anyways. So we get here, and what we do is we try to figure out what type of registration they are based on the params, based on other things. We've gotten signals from how the user got to that registration area. So as you can see here, we have our registration types laid out here: trial, invite, subscription, free, right? And we try to figure out which one. And these are in a certain order because they have precedence. So for instance, trial trumps everything, right? Even if you came in and maybe identified as an invite somehow through the trial registration page, no, that's not happening, your trial. Because, priorities, I guess. So you can see they're all done in that order of priority. So, maybe we could say that a little bit better in here to understand that, because that could be easy to modify and change that without knowing that we're trying to make a priority there. But that's what the else if in Ruby allows us to do. So we can see, like, as we saw in our trial registrations controller where we pushed on this parameter, right? We're observing it here, and that's how we determine if it's a trial registration, right? So from pushing it on from the trial registrations controller, which is a different URL, right? We now know that it's a trial here. Invited registration type. So invited, we did something like this, and it's once the user has been committed, because we're after that point, we just see if they have any members, because if a user is just freshly created and registered, if they have any members, that is a signal that they were invited, right? And we don't need to get any more complex than that to know that they're an invite. This also allows us to, by doing it this way and not going off any other signals, there's also the concept of between when a user was invited and when they sign up, there's a edge case there where they could have been invited and they were in between steps type of a thing. It's very, it would be an edge case, but it has happened. So this allows us to just read the current state of the database, and when the user is invited, it'll go and tag them. Yes.
Doug, all of the things that you're describing, one of the things that's in my brain is I'm wondering if, as we're starting to think about self-managed welcome flow in the future, like probably Q2, which is it the correct takeaway that I'm having right now that it would be useful and more maintainable if the self-managed welcome flow concept was like as close as possible to GitLab.com registration types? Or are we thinking that would be like a separate area of the code?
Yeah, that's hard. I've thought about it, and I know Buck and I have maybe talked about it too, and Sergey, and through some of Buck's reviews of what Buck is doing. Um, you know, in without looking at the code, I would usually just say, without having the knowledge of the code, I would say just put it in here, make it all one, right? But experience in this area tells me, because it'd be painful to have like two different concepts and have to maintain them both. But my experience tells me, as we are like 5 or whatever layers deep here, there is a lot of pull for me to say, and because of what Buck has started to find was we're kind of targeting just the admin and first user. So that makes a difference too, right? Or could be, depending on how you approach that. But right now, from the code I've seen from Buck on some of the stuff, it's admin, first admin, right? And so that tells me right away, that makes the decision for me. No, I would not put it in here because then
Okay.
I'd have to dance around that being that first person. And then all this other complexity. That being said, we may still hit the same controllers first, the same URL, meaning the same landing page, but from that point we should diverge as quickly as possible, I believe. And just a lot of reasons, some of this complexity, other things like that, but then also the differences. They may look the same, but they aren't the same. And so in code, what, a lot of people we try to dry, make everything dry, use the same code. Don't make, write your code twice. But I think we need to consider in that they may look the same, but they aren't the same. Meaning like they're the same now, but they're going to have different paths of growth, right?
Mhm.
And then if you keep them and then use the same code, you're always going to be trying to like, oh, I need another conditional. Oh, and this is going to be more complex and more complex.
Mhm.
Now, that being said, we should try to share the code in there maybe as much as we can as possible, but not use the same code paths, if that makes any sense for like, like, hey, if we have like a form that's the same, may we use the same view component, the view JS file or something like that, right? Uh,
Yep.
yeah, it's nuanced, but like I would not want to add more complexity in this and like add on the self-managed layer and then like, oh, well, they're an admin too, or not, Um,
Yep.
but who knows? Maybe.
I feel like we're like modeling off of it, to your point, Doug. Like we're like
Yeah.
sort of vaguely modeling off of it, but then probably namespacing it differently for our use case or whatever. And like there's like some slight differences, right? But like we're definitely using it as like the model and the basis, but it's just
Mhm.
probably going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know. Thanks.
Yeah. It'll be there. The allure will be like really strong right now to like say like, yeah, let's use the same path, but like I feel like that's going to be quickly, yeah, hard.
Cool.
Um,
Thank you. Yeah, and obviously I don't have any preferences on any of these things. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around what's easier and what's harder. So,
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of considerations too, right? We got to think about like what's going to allow us to be faster, right? And I have a feeling it's going to be like making them separate, but that could be wrong too. It depends on the use case, right? I know we've had the experience of mixed code for a couple of years now, so I know how that feels. I don't know how the other ones feel. Um, in this exact application. Okay, so then the subscription type is yet another type of logic. They're not all based on the same logic, right? They're not all just saying like, oh, like look at the params, like, invites uses something different, right? And right now we're looking at the mature version of this. This used to be a lot harder and worse and really impossible. Um, so as hard as this looks, as complex as this looks, as messy as this may look, it used to be a lot. This is really manageable compared. Um, all right, so how do we determine subscription? Well, we look at the refer. That's the answer. We look at the refer. And like the problem is though, we have to look at the user return to, okay? And the user return to, we simplified it so we pass it in as a param, so we're not talking about sessions. We're not looking at the actual user session in this service layer, which we should not be doing because that's a view layer and controller concern. We pass it in, right? So we pass it in. And as you can see, we pass it in from right here. And you're like, well, what is that? Where did that come from, right? That's devise, right? So that's a device thing. And so I really, really wanted to look at the devise helper for this and use that because devise, instead of like, looking at this string, there's a devise helper because it's internal devise logic, right? It could change, right? That string name could change, right? Because it records as user return to. However, the problem is the helper for devise that is used to look at it also wipes it and from the session. So we can't do that. We have to dig into it, get the string, um, and use it, right? And so we look at that user return to. That is what is stored when a user by devise when they're created. They like, let me record that user return to, right? And we could dive into that code and look at it later, but if we have time, but I don't think we will. We can look at it another time. So that's what we're looking at here, right? We're looking at like, okay, that return to value, is it the new subscriptions path? Because that new subscriptions path is what is set when you come from here, right? You can see that down at the small bottom there, the gitlab.com/subscriptions new, right? That's what's set. And that was the bug that Emma, that we fixed the other week. It was set to groups new, and now we know why that bug exists, because it didn't match this. So if it didn't match this, because it was set to groups, subscriptions, groups new or something like that, or group subscriptions new, whichever one, it didn't match this. We weren't tagged as a subscription registration. Therefore, we didn't hit that flow. So
And is it the same exact logic using parameter routing for a self-managed when you click that, or something different happening?
there's something different here. None of this code is reached like this. Self-managed does something totally different. None of this experience. Self-managed does not even have the welcome page. So yeah. Now this routing may be how, like after they sign in, if they get bounced to buy, that may be what's happening. But I feel like on the self-managed, and it was a couple weeks since I looked at it, so I think it goes directly to customer dot first to purchase.
If you're signed in, it'll take you to customers dot. If you're not, you're just gonna go through free sign up and get landed in gitlab.com.
Yeah, that's a yes. And so that's where it kind of leaves you hanging, right?
I
Yeah.
was just curious if there was like something that was trying to happen there, but yeah, that's good to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I mean, like, I get why it is the way it is, right? Like, this is basically just social, social sign on, right? Sign up. That's basically what that is. So it's not wrong to that way, but it kind of isn't very helpful, right? Yeah. Okay, so registration type, and then the last thing is, okay, free registration. And free registration is just a catch-all. If you're not any of those other things, you're this, right? There's no detection, whatever. It's just like, well, all the other ones failed. You didn't qualify. You're free. And so that is the most simplest of them. And how that happens is um, the hooks into that. This is just a save on the database, right? That's all it is. And so through that, these registration types are figured out, right? From here, we store other things. And why do we store the initial? Well, if we make it to that, we can talk about automatic registration, and that's why. The automatic registration needs to know the initial, because free converts to trials. And I have a follow-up question for you, Emma, that I will put in that spike issue about automatic trials as well, but I forgot to do that yet. Okay, so we record these into the JSONB column. And okay, perfect. And we also record the step you are on. Like, what is the step? Where are you in the registration, right? What is your next, where should you be, basically? And then we also, in Surrey helped introduce this. We trap you, don't trap, no. We ensure you complete our onboarding process. And to do that, we set a true flag here. And we can see our entry point for trials for our lightweight registration controller. And this is what, Emma, we talked about before, is we don't force it right now for the experiment. And this is where that happens, right? If you hit the candidate experience, you hit false here, this gets false here. We have certain redirections happening. Google Lead Management, that sounds right. Yeah. So these are then used. This is just recorded but this would be nice to know where someone is, but helps us for logging and other things, but is really used if the onboarding progress is turned to true. So if the onboarding progress is turned to true, if someone tries to go outside of the registration, the onboarding process, and they have not at least completed the welcome page for Lightweight registration, or the other company page and the group creation page for the non-lightweight, then we force redirect them back to this step URL. And so that's how that works, is there's a before action at the controller layer that says, oh, are you in onboarding, for every single GET request, I believe, in GitLab. And I just don't want to look at that code because I think it'll distract us right now. But it says any GET request, this onboarding progress is true, look at the step URL and force them back to that if the onboarding progress is true. And so that's how that happens. We also record the GLM content, because like I said, when we did this, we're trying to reduce the need to carry on parameters to other places where we actually use them during the registration. So these are set when the user comes in and logs in. What we want to do is not have to pass these around, because we used to just pass them around all the way through, and then we accidentally drop them when we introduce an experiment or add a new controller, and it just became buggy, right? So we record them at this point, and then when we need them, which is in the lead submission part, we pull them off and use them and send them on to customer dot in Marketo, right? So that's how that works. Okay, so then, and where you got 13 minutes here. So now we have the welcome controller. Okay, so we're on the non-lightweight registration path right here. I have this here. I don't think we'll get to that today. So now we're at the welcome controller, and this is where we see that welcome page, right? I could go through those steps to show it, but I think we are familiar with what it looks like. So what happens there? Okay, this is like the switchboard for determining where everything goes once you get. This is truly our first real onboarding page. I know we referred to step 1, step 2 being identity verification, all that stuff, but to me, this is the real first onboarding page. And in lightweight registration, it is the only onboarding page that's part of registration, meaning you're still expected to complete it. Okay, so what happens here? Okay, so this is the welcome page. Based on what you pick on that welcome page, you can become a trial. So that is where the automatic trials come into play. So you can see here we have our sign-up service. This is basically saving an update to the user that is pulled from doing the selecting certain things on that form, right? And as we can see, there is a lot of complexity. Again, we're sending the session return to, because the session return to is used at this point to redirect the person to whatever is in there. Now, we could have just said, well, why not just look at the subscription type? Because I could be wrong here because it's been a minute since I looked at the code. But I believe what we are doing here is just redirecting to that. Whereas if we said subscription type, then we'd also have to store that URL. It's best just to let Devise do the things that Devise wants to do, basically at that point, instead of trying to take over that source of truth. We were using that source of truth to determine if you're subscriptions, but go back to Devise to let us know what to do after, where to go after that. So now we have the update params that are being set in, and you can see these are all the things that we're used to that are familiar words, right? I believe the joining the project, the status, the company, all those things that we are setting. This is where we figure out if you're going to be an automatic trial or not. So it's based on certain logic based on what you picked up here, right? And I think it's going to be based off setup for company, if I remember correctly. So we set this in the params to be sent. We set the registration type to be trial. So with that, we then go into the sign up service. And in the sign up service, we just hit a save. And then we also send a lead if you're not a trial. If you're free, I believe is what it's going to come down to, right? So if we were to look at what this does, we can see this is a little bit of a look of the strategy pattern where now we've determined everything's a certain type of a registration. And so in that strategy pattern, then we just ask those registration things what we should be doing at different times based on what we care about, right? And so we can see the invite is going to send that iterable lead. So is free. Subscription will not. And this is Emma, where I'm kind of thinking about how we might, in that spike of how we might do that automatic customer dot registration account creation stuff. As you can see, free just does it already, already sends the lead. And so my initial thought was just to be cheap and like that's making a customer dot thing. I could just send another param to it and tell it to create an account too, basically, right? And so that's why I was asking about some of the reasons why it's asking about invite, because you can see like there's some, it's sending it too. So I was like, that's why I'm thinking in my mind, should be using that lead or should we just create another call or something like that, right? And so that's why I'm kind of asking about invites.
And is it relevant that leads are created for self-managed in Marketo? Something I've learned recently.
No, I just for GitLab.com is my only focus here. When I talk about this part. So like my thought is like we're already making a request to customer dot. Why not in that same request just handle that automatic account creation or should I just create another request? And it's kind of feeling like we should just create another request, and that might need another endpoint. Maybe that's a good thing to do that
Yeah.
way. But they're both in the background, so there is a little bit of delay or not assured that it's going to be done when you think it's going to be done when you need it, right? But maybe that's okay. But we'll have to dig through that. And you can see like that's why I was, asking about that. And I see, oh, subscription is false. That means we'd have to send a lead. I'm like, we probably don't want a lead. I don't want to create a lead just for that. But I could send another parameter that just turns off the lead part and only does account creation part. But maybe I should be creating some. But then this iterable lead stuff is used other places too. And so maybe it's just a better idea to do another request at the same time.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay, so as you see, that's what's happening in that sign up service. We're triggering that iterable action. The iterable action calls a worker and does it in the background. Okay. Um, and we're saving things onto the user table. And as you can see, we're assigning these parameters. And I know Constantine, you're on the lightweight registration stuff and it's doing, similar things. And you can see our user params are being set. Since we set that stuff about automatic trial in the controller layer, we don't even have to talk about it in the service layer, basically. And it'll set it because then what we are doing, and this is probably a good point to talk about in our last 5 minutes here, is an important point, the onboarding status presenter. Okay, so in the status create service, we went and set up our registration type and everything like that. But how do we read and use it, right, throughout the rest? And so for that, we created a presenter, and that presenter is what's being used to talk about as a way to know what to talk to the registration types, basically to use the registration types, right? And so we got to be sure whenever we update the user record and things like that, we break that, or we tell it to go find a new version of that, or reload that user record that you just updated. And so that's why things like this happen. And you might see this in the control layer too, or similar concepts where we reset the status. And so the user status is set here. And this is, let's see if I'm becoming a fibber here. The user status at the service layers, we were using the user status. At the controller layer, we use the presenter, which invokes that status inside of it. So we are in that one right here, which is the CE version because we use it for other things in CE, but we really want the EE version. And as you can see, we wanted to keep the logic of this being like, just concern yourself with presentation layer things. And so that's why I was saying, this is what's used to talk about at the controller and the view layer about what I should be doing for different registration types throughout that flow. Because right now that welcome controller is where all the registration types meet, except for the lightweight registration. And so that's the big switchboard part of it. So we got to know what to do in that moment. So that's what this presenter is meant to do, is to deal with those view and controller layer concerns that aren't backend concerns. So, however, sometimes we need to know at the service layer, which is in the model layer or service layer backend, that about what registration type it is. So what we did was we allowed user status to own, telling us what the figuring out from the database what registration type you are, basically, and then we use it other places. So this user status then basically says start. It allows us to give back to us that strategy pattern of that class we need for each type of these registration types that are stored in the database. And so this is how we then, after we've set it in the database, then we start acting like that registration type, is we go and find out which class from that strategy pattern applies to us. And that's based off the values in the database, right? And then if we were to look at each one of these classes, they hold all the different nuances of what it means to be free a different registration type. And these are used throughout the view layer. It could be used in the backend anywhere. So whenever we try to make a branch of doing something different, that's why I talk about on some reviews, I'm like, don't look at the trial type. You should not be asking if it's a trial. You should be asking what for my registration type, what should I be doing? You shouldn't be, and if you need differences for that, you should be making those differences here. So each registration type, if they hit that area, should have a determined behavior defined. And then you just ask that registration type how to behave, basically. And this allows us, while we are in this mixed nexus of being in the same place for all registration types, to have differences. Now, when we implement the, and we're almost at time, how we implement the lightweight registration flow and how we unify that, I want to see if it starts making sense to try to make that even simpler, right? So if we can get to a place where we already know who we are when we hit the welcome controller, but we're asking again, right? So maybe there's an answer to just going to different routes or routing differently. And if we route differently, then we can already be in the area that is for that registration type, and we won't have to ask all these questions again. We can then make declarative code. And so that's what I want to explore a little bit. We stayed away from doing that in this iteration because it was like, oh man, now we got to make 3 streams of like controllers and routes and all that stuff, right? And it just didn't seem like it made sense. And I'm not sure it does in the future either, but I want to relook at that. And that's what we're going to try to look at in that spike a little bit. And Emma, that's what I wanted to talk about, that automatic trial concept, because the automatic trial concept is affecting a lot of this, because it's like let's say when you're on this welcome page, right? I don't know where to go if you're an automatic trial until you make a selection, right? But so if we still keep automatic trials, then I'm like, oh, that kind of makes it so I have to, like, I'm going to be pushed into the idea of like still using the same controller where they all meet, because like otherwise I got to make some kind of routing decision based on parameters, or I have to make some sort of other decision that is like reduces the value of having different paths.
Yeah. And I would ideally like to not have that if leadership or people who
Yeah,
are the vested interest feel comfortable with it.
yeah. I mean, with that, I'll stop there for now because we're at time, but we can continue this in other sessions. I hopefully this has value for some. I on that automatic trial concept, I have I'm just going to stop the recording.